Mishmash!
Heya! Today we're doing our next faction focus for this Quar's war. And for this episode we're talking about the unofficial poster boys, the Crusaders. Like in our previous episodes of this series, we're going to be taking a look at their lore, talking about the models, and doing a little bit of hobbying. In several ways, the Crusade is one of the biggest puzzle pieces to the greater narrative of Quar. And I want to mention, not baiting you to watch my other episodes, but I do guarantee there's a lot of little pieces I leave in previous episodes that'll make more sense in this one. Like I've stated in the community notes, I'm planning on doing Koftir after this episode, and after that we're going to be talking about the tractors. But like always, before we get into it, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos a little earlier, and for $5 you get a weekly Q&A as well as a model critique. To send in your questions, you can see them in exclusive community notes, and send in your models via the Mishmash Discord. Like always, I want to extend a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys keep this place running. And additionally, if you're interested in Quar, make sure to use my affiliate link to wargamesatlantic.com. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps me out. The more sales they make on Wargames, the more likely we're going to get more plastic kits. But enough of the promotional stuff. Get tucked in, get a moth cake, and let's talk about the Crusade. Now, like I stated previously, I have gone into what the Crusade is about in previous videos, but I'll give you a little refresher before we get into the greater nitty-gritty. The Crusade is an ideological political movement with the premise that the Long War is inevitable as the results of the stratisfactions of core society. The Long War itself is an off-and-on battle that's been going on for 700 plus years. It essentially encapsulates the entirety of Alwyd. This war has been a long, slow grind as a result of the laws of war. While they do seem to favor a more gentleman's-like approach to warfare itself, it essentially forces every single army within Alwyd to walk on cultural and social eggshells. These rules, of course, favor the Royalists. The Royalists are, of course, the ones in power, wealth, political influence, and immense privilege. And while I do find myself to be far more a Royalist enjoyer, it makes sense that the Crusade is built on the idea that the first families must go. But something you may or may not have noticed in this faction focus, the Crusade itself is not necessarily a country. The Crusader movement encapsulates several different countries, but its nation of origin is Talk, the largest country in Alwyd. And now that we're actually talking about the origins of the Crusade, I believe it's about time I properly introduce you to arguably the most important character in Quar, Sun Alakinder Rinvenk, the father and spiritual heart of the Crusade. Alakinder spent decades of his life envisioning, building, and serving as the Crusaders' political head. Alakinder was not only a great political leader, but also a visionary when it came to advancing military tactics and doctrine. He'd create and implement the much-vaunted airmobile and continuous paved roads linking country to country within Alwyd. He truly was a revolutionary Quar, not only modernizing the forces of Talk as well as the Crusade, but he would inspire many young Quar to fight for their freedom and autonomy. Alakinder, and thus the Crusade itself, embodied the idea of accelerationism. No longer would these long drawn-out wars continue. It was time for change, a time for the war to end. And though Alakinder did not take pride in this idea, he truly did believe that the only way to end the war was to make things so extreme that it had to end. The Crusade itself is something that the world of Alwyd had never seen before. One country gaining enough power to become a proper juggernaut against the greater idealism of an entire planet. And if there's one man to blame for this grand standardization of the forces of the Crusade, it's Alakinder. He skillfully turned the weaknesses of the Royalist armies against them. As stated previously, the rules of war greatly favored the Royalists, and as a result of the privilege of not having to overextend themselves, they essentially became weak. Their standardization became lax and pretty unorganized. That and several high-ranking officials within Royalist armies are definitely there by way of nepotism and their family names. And money. Which is something that's rather brilliantly implemented into Clash of Rifles. Koftir is Keratin's, or the officer models, are actually less expensive than the Crusaders. This is because the Crusade rightfully promotes its most experienced members and veterans to places of power. Because of how revolutionary the Crusade was, it would only begin to grow. As a result, several different nations would actually be absorbed into the crusade itself, this being Mirror Breach, Tulmore, and Iski. I do want to mention too that these aren't the only countries that joined, but they're arguably the most important. Upper and Lower Barrow, Eastern Shralm, Krasel, and Darril would actually be a part of the crusade as well, but in the current fluff, these first three nations are the most important. For now, at least. Now, the Crusade itself is undoubtedly and unquestionably one of the most revolutionary and successful militaries in all of Alwood. Their reputation as an army has unfortunately lost a little bit of polish. Several integral victories and successful liberations of their allies have still come with the great cost of valuable Quar and materials. The unfortunate reality is that despite having so many good veterans and valued combatants within the battlefield, when time comes, these Quar are not easily replaced. Depleted ranks are often filled with raw and uncertain recruits, many of which have never seen the horrors of the battlefield. But these issues would only be the beginning of the Crusaders' problems. As of 1780, soon Elakinder Renvank, Chancellor of Talk, father and architect of the Crusade, would mysteriously pass away in his sleep. The circumstances of his death, even today, remain unclear. But what was certain was the unfortunate fracturing and partial dissolvement of the Crusade. A handful of allied nations would completely declare their independence from the Crusader cause, opting to completely remove themselves from the Long War, though this would only cause more infighting and violence between these nations, which would once again force the Crusade to spend valuable resources on quelling these violent rebellions. Through life and death, Elakinder proved to be the most valuable domino in all of Alwood. But before I go too forward into talking about the more modern era of the Crusade, I'd like to talk a little bit about their greatest rivals, and the effects of this said rivalry on the entirety of Alwood. Their greatest rivals in my eyes are undoubtedly the Kaftirans. The nation of Kaftir is the royalist state. They are the oldest single government kingdom in all of Alwood. Their history dates back to the oldest surviving relics of Quar society. I'll get into more detail in the official Kaftir faction focus, of course. Now, though I did describe the Kaftiran and Royalist forces as much less experienced as the Crusaders, the main key to their success in defense and siege warfare is the Great Wall, a 1,000-year-old monumental fortification that extends along the border of Kaftir. For nearly 1,000 years, this wall would ensure the safety and protection of Kaftir, up until 1771. The Crusaders would ensure the fall of Gate 18, which was quickly succeeded by the breaches of Gates 16, 17, and 19. The Crusade had successfully breached the wall. Some of the grandest battles had taken place at this point. Kaftir had thrown everything she had at the invading armies. And not to mention, the Kaftirans would fight this battle alone. Their allies had troubles of their own. These battles would occur up until late 1772. The Crusade had been so effective in their push that the royal families of Kaftir had made plans to evacuate to Fidwag. Surely victory was on the horizon for the Crusade. Finally, Elakinder's vision of the New World would be brought about. Finally, every Quar would live with full autonomy, no longer under the thumb of the royalist tyrants. But this was not to be. The first of their problems would be the Crusade's resources had drawn to a trickle. Their full-on onslaught would come to a screeching halt. But what would truly shatter the Crusade's efforts was the coming of an early Sithwin. Now, I've never mentioned the Sithwin before, so if you're not familiar, it goes a little something like this. Every 3 years, the world of Alwood has a long year, and the final month of the long year is known as the Sithwin, or the Month of Storms. And something to mention is the Month of Storms doesn't seem to be an entirely naturally occurring event. Though it has been around for centuries, it isn't exactly something that has always been. Now, these violent storms are said to be so bad that they end up forcing the sands of the desert into the mountainous regions of the snowy plateaus. Now, going back to the Sithwin of 1772, not only would this storm come early, it would also stay late. To this day, it is described as the worst any Quar had seen in generations. It was so bad that Lake Morandi had nearly frozen over. The aftermath of this storm would leave the Crusade in squalor. Despite their efforts, their grand crusade into Kaftir would fail. Though they would leave with one last middle finger as they blew up several portions of the wall. But now that I've gone over the greatest success and failure of the Crusade, it's time that we fast forward again. To the modern era, the Crusade is effectively splintered after Alakindar's death. The Crusader movement overall has slowed down significantly. Okay, I did kind of lie, we actually are rewinding just a little bit, as in 1777, the rumors of Alakindar's failing health began to spread through the upper Crusader command and the governing bodies of nations across Alwyd. Tok, the father nation of the Crusade of course, was now nearly in a state of civil war. During this time, Mirabreach would make its move. They've now effectively become the new face and juggernaut of the Crusader movement. After deciding to take things into his own hands and go rogue in the initial Crusade, Gallo Loek would declare himself Camprig of the new era of the Crusade. He had no interest in the squabbles of the nation of Tok. Now was the time to strike, not talk things out. It was time that the Crusade had finished what they had started. In the coming years, Loek would not only become a beacon of hope for a morally and spiritually bereft crusade, he would take charge of his crusade, this being Mirabreach and Easki. He would lead them headstrong into the west, effectively capturing new ground and rekindling the Crusade's former glory. At this time, Tolmor, Tok, Lorbaro, and Darril would still be loyal to the Crusade itself, but they would have no involvement with Loek's crusade. Eventually, Loek would meet with Gaigor Raidir, leader of the Western Arnjarn Shadow Government or the Foskilde. Together, they would devise a plan to once again launch an assault onto Koftir, though this would unfortunately lead to another unsuccessful attack. This was in part due to Raidir's erratic changing of plans and shifty nature. This would leave the Western Crusade almost exactly where they started, short of men, short on morale, and in desperate need of aid. All while the Eastern Crusade, back in its fatherland of Tok, would be rumbling with discord. And that's essentially the basics of the Crusader lore and story so far. I'll be the first to admit, when I first got into Quar, I definitely found these guys to be less interesting than the Koftirans. Though at this point, like pretty much every faction in Quar, I really like these guys. There's a very interesting story here. And though they're not exactly the official poster boys of Quar, I still kind of view them that way. Having your somewhat unofficial mascot have so much inner turmoil and political discord really sets the picture for what Quar is all about. It is really interesting to see where these guys are going. I really do like Loek as a character. He really does embody the original spirit of Alakindar's vision of the Crusade, all while the inner discord of Tok is basically centered around the idea and rumor of Alakindar's son taking his place. Which most definitely begs the question of the Crusade essentially implementing the most integral rule of royalist culture: position of power awarded by blood. Oh, the irony. The sweet, sweet irony. The birthplace of the Crusade, turning back on their greatest values. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are other rumors that suggest this was a coup of sorts, and Alakindar's son is basically just a puppet. This is what I love so much about Quar as a whole. Of course, the big tractors, weapons, uniforms, all the cool bits of war that are implemented into the series. But what really, really makes me like this series is the juicy political drama. Which is really funny to me because I really view Quar and my hobby as a whole as a great escapism from the real world. Yet the political drama is my favorite part of Quar. The main thing I'm trying to escape from. Okay, I'm getting a little off track. At the end of the day, the Crusade is an amazing faction. And above everything else, they are kind of the integral piece of Quar. They are the biggest puzzle piece to the story as a whole. In just 20 short years, the Crusade had been able to change the entirety and complexity of a planet. But with that, I think I've cut it as far as the lore portion. I think it's about time we do a little hobbying. So you notice I'm saying hobbying rather than painting, as I've actually done a painting tutorial on the Crusaders and Koftirans before. I decided for these two episodes I'm going to be doing a little bit of building and kitbashing and a little bit of a showcase of the models. Thus far for the new era of Quar, the Crusaders and the Koftirans are the only figures that we have in plastic. Obviously this will gradually change as more figures come out. But I really do like spicing up the base figures, and there's a lot of little elements that you can do to make them look cool. There's all kinds of cool little bits and extra arms, weapons that you can get from Joshua Qualtieri's store and myminifactory.com, as well as wargamesatlantic.com. This ranges from cool little arms to kind of spice them up, little bits that you can add on, extra little parts just for dioramas, and I'm going to utilize this for a little figure I'm going to be kitbashing today. Recently, this little Pick Squirrel pack was released as an STL, though you can actually get the original figures from zombiesmith.com. I decided, since I've already made a couple of Pick Squirrel handlers, that I wanted to make a pack Sherpa or a pack mule of sorts. Essentially what I'm doing is utilizing all the little extra bits and bobs onto one figure. In essence, this little man is going to have a speed run and back problems. The first thing I decided to do was take some of the base Crusader satchels and glue it onto the sides of the pack, and over time I would add on the smaller satchels to the upper portions. I decided to attach a grenade and a helmet to his belt, and the arm in the stock kit fits really nicely, just kind of padding his side. Gradually, I would continue to add little bits onto the backpack, this being some extra grenades, some little ammo pouches, and bits like that. The satchel itself is very nice for kitbashing because it's basically just a huge block, and my idea was if there's a place without something occupying it, I gotta glue something on. Maybe I did go a little too far, but I don't know, I still like how he looks. I decided to put a bedroll on the top, but I had ended up changing the position a couple of times. With this, I decided to start adding on a bunch of grenades to the little knobs and little wicker portions of the backpack itself, and this would actually work out pretty well. I kind of imagine Russell's backpack from Up whenever I see this figure. Not only would I utilize some of the Crusader bits, I decided to use one of the copter and baguette sacks because, of course, I had to. Now, for his right arm, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I ultimately decided I was going to utilize another upgrade bit and place a spare bowgun behind his arm, kind of tucking it nicely into the satchel itself. It fits really comfortably, and the arm that I decided to use is a spare barrel. Once that was in place, I decided to add on some extra little bits, this being a Koftiran kind of satchel of sorts. Along with this, I decided to put on a couple of bedrolls, one of them kind of acting as a nice little neck pillow. Now, the other bedroll I placed on top was from the Koftir kit, but if there's one regret I have with this figure is I kind of wish I glued things in a different place to make everything on top look a little bit more shapely. I think some of the positions I chose kind of backed myself into a corner because I didn't want to rip pieces off and make it look kind of messed up. I did kind of play around with the idea of having a Pick Squirrel kind of crest the top. Maybe I could still fit one in, but at the end of the day, if one of you guys uses that idea, I think that would be just as cool. And for his melon, I gotta go with that classic Jeep cap. I really like this head. And after all the little bits and bobs, I'm really happy with this guy. I really do like adding on little special units that might not necessarily have a place in the game, but he looks cool, and man, he's gonna be a bitch to paint, isn't he? Anyway, I did want to show you guys, and you guys actually asked for this, the new Trench Raider figures. I really like these guys, and I was gonna paint them, but I just didn't have enough time to get it done for this video. I will, however, show you one of them that I painted, and I really like these figures. They utilize some classic trench clubs and hand derringers that would practically shatter your wrist if you weren't being careful. These are better known as Dubdo derringers, an 8-gauge double-barrel break-open derringer, which is often loaded with a scatter round and one with a solid slug. This is ridiculous, and I love this thing. But something cool to kind of end this portion on the Trench Raiders is the kit itself comes with 3 finely crafted figures, but in addition to this kit, you actually get some extra arms to make a 4th figure if you use a regular Crusader. And when it comes down to it, I really love the Crusaders. I love these models. Still hard to believe that just a few months ago I saw a box of Crusaders on eBay while looking for spare bits, and now I'm in love with the series. And it makes me happy that you guys like it as much as I do. And like always, if you liked what you saw, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.